On behalf of the Museum of Modern Art, the Education Department, and the School and Teacher Programs team, I want to welcome you all to Art as a Tool for Social and Emotional Learning, Fostering Connections Between School Communities and Museums. My name is Lisa Mazzola, and I'm the Assistant Director of School and Teacher Programs, and I'm joined by my colleagues Larissa Raphael and Frances Estrada. The three of us are thrilled that you're here with us to explore this very important and timely subject. Before we launch into the content of the day, I wanted to share some information about MoMA's expansion, some of which you saw in the video. On October 21st, MoMA reopened after a 4-month closure with a reimagined presentation of modern and contemporary art. MoMA's opening collection presentation highlights the creative affinities and frictions produced by displaying painting, sculpture, architecture, design, photography, media, performance, film, and works on paper together. Conceived and installed by a cross-departmental team of curators, the presentation foregrounds complex relationships among works of art and encourages many possible routes through the galleries. The 5th, 4th, and 2nd floor collection galleries offer a deeper experience of art through all mediums and by artists from more diverse geographies and backgrounds than ever before. We are happy you're here to experience it so close to the reopening. Here is our agenda that you all received at registration. We will be here in the theater until 10:45, at which time we will transition to the first of 3 gallery sessions. We will then return to the Education Building for lunch in the classrooms across from the theater. After lunch, we will go back to the galleries for the remaining 2 gallery sessions. The colored stickers on your name tags indicate the group that you will travel with. Each group will experience all 3 sessions. The last portion of the day, we will be back in the classrooms where we will take part in a workshop focused on self-care. We want to start with a little bit of background on how we became interested in the field of social and emotional learning. In October of 2018, Wendy Woon, the Edward John Noble Deputy Director of Education, along with other museum directors from the US and Germany, was invited to attend a talk on secular ethics at His Holiness the Dalai Lama's residence in Dharamsala, India. At this meeting, he spoke about the global need for secular ethics and the importance of education. When she returned from the meeting, she approached me and my colleagues and asked us to consider how MoMA education could engage in these topics. Wendy regrets that she cannot join us today, but she sends her greetings to all of you. Following that conversation, Frances, Larissa, and I attended the launch of Social, Emotional, and Ethical, or C-Learning, curriculum in Delhi, India, where the Dalai Lama spoke about his vision for the role of education to make a better future, as you will hear in this short video clip.
Now, today's world, a lot of problems. So now, big question, whether this problem can reduce or not. Answer is yes. How? Change here through knowledge. So education, now future can change through our perceptions already, our mental attitude. So firstly, as I mentioned yesterday, I think already, this world eventually, through education, create more sense of compassion, loving kindness. Then, ideologically or some sort of politically, you may find differences, but still respect them and through talk, try to find mutually agreeable solution. That always has happened. So then through that way, this century, unlike previous century, this century can be genuine, peaceful century. For that, this century should be century of compassion. Not talking about next life or some other thing, but day-to-day life. More compassionate mind, you get maximum benefit. So it is best way to take care of your own health, like that. So some of these knowledge mentioned in religious text, but we should take these things as academic subject, not religious subject. So now we are free, whether we repeat 20th century or think more wider way and use human intelligence properly and a more realistic way approach. So that's up to us. Now I'm already 84-year-old, so within few years I will say goodbye. So but the younger generation, you have to live on this planet. So whether this 21st century can be happy century, peaceful century, harmonious century, you should make effort now.
This workshop is a launch of a new initiative about how MoMA can support social and emotional learning through professional development for teachers and our work with students. Thank you for being here at this important moment. Next, I'm going to invite my colleague Larissa up to say a few words about our work.
Now
So in addition to working with teachers in professional development such as this one, we're also working internally with other staff at MoMA, within MoMA's education department, as well as our educators, to discover how can our school visits program support students' social and emotional learning. For us, this will be a year of exploration and experimentation. We are taking a slow approach of really thinking this through in an attempt to be genuine and intentional in our integration of social emotional learning in our programming. We are exploring the following questions. What is the connection between art and social emotional learning? For us, we believe that art is an integral part of the human experience and is a lens through which humans process emotions, experiences, and beliefs. So how can we help people make these connections and use our collection to its full potential? And what do we do well already? What do museum educators do well already? We as museum educators have a particular pedagogical approach that focuses less on the content of the artworks, but prioritizes student experiences. We are interested in exploring how our inquiry-based approach supports the development of social emotional competencies. Later today, we will spend some time in the galleries looking at works of art through different lenses. Everything that you see is based on the kinds of activities we already do in the galleries with students. Jackie will be exploring conversations around art. She will be exploring how conversations around art can help build self-awareness of bodily sensation. Frances will be exploring the role of empathy when looking at contemporary art. And I will lead you through a drawing activity as a way to cultivate attention. And the last question is, how can we expand our practice to support social emotional learning? What aren't we doing yet? This is obviously a question that we can't answer yet, but we are curious to know what other potentials exist within the museum. And we hope that today we can start answering that question together. Sorry, which button do I press? Thank you. So since we are coming together from different places and we don't all know each other, we thought it would be helpful to set up some community guidelines before we start the day so that we all can start on the same page. I'm going to read these through one by one, and then I will ask if we can all agree to follow these today. So we believe that art, in the power of art to be a catalyst for deep emotion and conversations. Because we believe this, we understand that there may be some sharing and or difficult conversations that happen, especially as we are thinking about social and emotional learning. We acknowledge the courage of each of us to speak. It is not the easiest for everyone, but we do appreciate your participation. We will speak from our own perspective using I language. We will try not to generalize or speak for others. We will listen to others with care and compassion. We will acknowledge hurtful or offensive language, whether intentional or unintentional, and use it as a learning opportunity. If we do not address language that feels problematic, we lose an opportunity for growth and learning. We will maintain confidentiality of this private, safe space. If people share personal details or experiences, please keep them within our group today. They do not become your stories to share. And we will take care of ourselves and acknowledge our boundaries and know when we need to step away. So just take a break when you need it. Hopefully the bathrooms are right outside, have a drink of water, and please be aware of your own limits, both physical and emotional. Does anyone have any questions? Can everybody raise their hands to show agreement? Thank you. And I'm going to leave you with a tweet from the Dalai Lama himself. Our modern education systems don't reveal much understanding of how to transform our emotions. To do so, we have to use intelligence. We need to conduct ourselves with nonviolence and on the basis of compassion and cultivate respect for others. So with this thought, I'm going to hand it back to Lisa.
So while we're changing our presentation, I just wanted to remind everyone that you received some note cards and golf pencils. Those are going to be used, or those are for you to use to jot down any questions that you have, because we're going to have a Q&A portion during the panel. So just a reminder that you have your golf pencil or your own pencil and paper. So as questions arise, please jot them down. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our keynote speaker. Dawn Brooks DeCosta began what she calls her service of teaching 23 years ago as an art teacher in St. Gabriel's Catholic School in East Elmhurst, Queens. For the last 15 years, she has been at Thurgood Marshall Academy Lower School in Harlem, first as an art teacher, and then in 2011, taking on the role of principal. I have had the great fortune of working with Dawn for as long as I've been at MoMA. When I started at the museum in 2005, I quickly met Dawn. She attended all of our teacher workshops. Her contributions were always insightful and thoughtful, and I was grateful for her calming presence as I was transitioning into a new role. Over time, T-Mouse became a school partner, and when Dawn assumed the role of principal, our partnership deepened under her leadership. The term grace under pressure could not be more apropos for Dawn, and now she is not just attending our programs, she is leading them. Dawn has received numerous awards and recognitions for her work. She holds a BS in Education from St. John's University and an MS in Fine Art Education from Queens College. Currently, Dawn is a doctoral student at Teachers College Columbia University, where she is researching social and emotional learning, mindful practices, and culturally responsive and relevant approaches in education. Dawn is also a very proud wife, mother, and grandmother. Please join me in welcoming Dawn, but before she begins her presentation, she wanted to share this short video with you.
My name is Dawn Brooks DeCosta, and I'm the principal of Thurgood Marshall Academy Lower School in Harlem, New York City. I think that there are a variety of things that have caused the school climate to be more positive. We start our day with a little mindful practice to help sort of frame our day in a positive way. And I noticed that before doing that, the mornings were a little bit chaotic, a little aggressive, and then it would take the teachers a long time to calm them down. So the mindfulness in the morning has been helpful to sort of frame the day in this positive way. And so throughout the day, we've been doing some of the brain breaks and the compassionate practices. And so when stress gets high in the classroom, it's always good for teachers to be able to stop and sort of get kids to refocus through the brain breaks. And recently we've been having the students lead the brain breaks, which has been really fun, which means that they'll take more ownership of it, because I'm hoping that it also happens at home. And so we did some self-care with the teachers, because the teacher stress is also very high. And so we want to be able to be our best for the children. And in order to do that, we need to take care of our stress levels also. And now that the kids have techniques to calm down, we can always call on those techniques as a preventative measure. So before we react in a negative way, sometimes taking that brain break and breathing is helpful before we respond in a way that's not positive. I really do believe that children have to feel loved and cared for and safe in order to learn. And so all of these techniques, the mindful practice, what we're doing with ruler, and the emotional regulation and the brain breaks are all working together to make sure that the kids feel loved and cared for and safe so that they can learn effectively.
And once again, please welcome Dawn Brooks DeCosta.
So thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here today. I enjoy coming to MoMA. I just like walking in the door. Just on a day like today, it's election day. I remember when I was teaching that I just love, and as much as I loved my little angels, it was wonderful to get outside of the school and be able to learn in such a beautiful atmosphere. And so I do remember going to all of the workshops, even when Lisa was like, "Didn't you go to this workshop already?" And I was like, "Yep, and I'm here again." And I did appreciate my principal allowing me to come to all the workshops at that time. So the video did share a lot about what we do at Thurgood Marshall Academy Lower School, and so I am bringing you greetings from the village of Harlem, New York City. And I would like to share some of the practices that we've been doing over the past 8 to 10 years. So Thurgood Marshall has been open since 2005. It is an elementary school, kindergarten to 5th grade, and the school was open in a unique partnership between Abyssinian Development Corporation, New Visions for Public Schools, and the Department of Education. And so we opened in 2005 with just K-1 and then grew each year until we are now at capacity. And our first graduating class are now juniors in college. We have 2 administration staff, myself and my assistant principal. It's a very small school. Office staff, 11 classroom teachers, 10 out of classroom teachers, and 9 paraprofessionals. So our enrollment, 2,205 students, K to 5. You can see our demographics, predominantly black and brown children, special needs, 22%, and a small population of English language learners. So how we began this work, I did attend Teachers College, Columbia University for my second master's when I was studying education administration. And I certainly expected to retire from the classroom. I love being in the classroom. I was teaching art. I was teaching something that I love. And someone said, "Why don't you get your 30 and above and go to the end of the salary scale?" That was actually my motivation. And so I did that, just like I did the 25-55. I know how to listen to people. I know how to listen to people who are, elders. And so they did advise me. I didn't know what I was doing, but I said, wherever, I'm going to sign. So I did decide to do my 30 and above, and someone said, Teachers College has a program that you can go to in the summer. And I was like, okay, so I can do that. Get your 30 and above in something that you might use one day. And I do have 4 children. And so I was thinking, I can't go to school at night, so I'm going to go during the summer. So after I got there and I was probably the oldest one there. Everyone, I had a black and white notebook. Nobody carries that anymore. Everybody had their laptops. And people were talking about, like, there were people who had been teaching maybe 1 year, and they were already talking about being principals. And I was like, this is interesting. There were so many things that they were saying that I was like, you better not do that if you go open your school. Because we talk about principals that we want to run out of the school. You know that's true. And so you come in and you're not respecting of everybody in the school, this is going to be a problem. Or you go into a school and you decide you're going to change everything without talking to the people that have been there before you got there. This is going to be a problem. So as I sat there for a while, I was like, you know what, I think I can do this. I think that I can be a principal. I had no intention of doing this job. But as I was listening to others, I was like, you know what, I can envision that I'll be able to do all of the wonderful things that I have been doing in my classroom and now expand this to a whole school. So when the opportunity came for me to become principal at the school that I was teaching at, I took that opportunity. And that was 8 years ago. And so it's been a pleasure, and I still love doing it every day, even when it's difficult. So at that time, when I went to Teachers College, there was a component of our program that was focused around emotional intelligence and social emotional learning. We had a class, we had a mindfulness class where we had to meditate, we had to document, we had to reflect on our feelings. And at the time, I didn't realize why I was doing that. But then I realized that the stress levels are high. The stress levels of the job are really high, and I didn't realize how lonely the job of principal was until I got into the role. And then I realized why we had all those mindfulness classes, because it would be something that I really would need. And then when I got to the school, I was like, okay, so it's a little chaotic. I was putting out a lot of fires, and it was small things like I felt could be managed, like people could handle on their own. So I decided to take one of my teachers to Yale University. They had a program that they were sharing called Ruler. And the creators of the Ruler approach were two of the professors that I had in my leadership program. So they were inviting us to come see this new program that they were rolling out. So I took one of my teachers who was always already like a model of social emotional learning. She was just naturally like that. And so I figured she would be like the pilot in the school where everybody could go. And so we went to Yale for 4 days and we got trained. Over the years, we've added other things to our social emotional learning practice. Thurgood Marshall was a vision of Dr. Calvin Butts, who's the president of SUNY Old Westbury, but also a pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church, which is a staple in Harlem. And his vision was that Thurgood Marshall would be culturally responsive, where the students would learn about leaders that look like them, that they would learn to see models of excellence in themselves. And so that culturally responsive approach was already present at Thurgood Marshall, and we've sort of integrated the social emotional learning and the mindful practice. And we do feel that you can't have one without the other. In order for students to trust you, they need to also feel loved and cared for and acknowledged for their diversity. So we started with the leadership, and then people asked, so how did you get staff to buy in? So at that time, we had a new evaluation system. It was when we first started the Danielsons, and so people were really stressed out about that. The Common Core was really new, and so people were stressed out about the accountability. And so we didn't want the teachers to feel like this was another thing to do, another thing on their plate to do. So we had to bring it to the staff the way that we learned it, which was this social emotional learning, this emotional intelligence, and this mindful practice is going to help you to do all of the things that you need to do in the classroom. It's going to give you a more positive classroom culture. The students are going to be more focused and ready to learn, and you're going to actually be able to teach. So this is how we brought it to the staff. As the years went on, we also brought the family component. So when we talk to the families, we make sure not to use a lot of acronyms, which sometimes we are guilty of doing. So how we brought social emotional learning to the families was, we talked about stress. Everybody can relate to stress. parents' stress levels are very high. And for most of the parents, no one had ever asked them how they felt about anything. So we're just expected to kind of go, and we don't stop to think about all of the emotions that we go through in a day and how we regulate our emotions and how our emotions impact our children. And so we did bring it to the parents, and we actually had some parents go to Yale and get trained so that they could lead these workshops for other parents. We've also done a lot of self-care through an organization called Pure Edge, who does these brain breaks and mindful practice and a whole series on self-care. We've also done the self-care for teachers because, again, the stress levels are high, and as teachers, we also forget to attend to our own needs. And so self-care is really important as well for the staff. So over the years, we have seen gains in our academic achievement of students. And so with the increased focus in the classroom also becomes increased instructional time, increased focus time. And there's been so many positive side effects of the social emotional. So we were doing it to build positive relationships, to lower incidents, to build a positive classroom culture, to connect with people, to get teachers to be able to have a teacher team meeting and connect with each other in positive ways, to trust each other, but also to build our positive relationship with parents. When parents come in and their emotions are high, when something happens to your child, you feel like it has happened to you. And so sometimes people are communicating in ways that are not positive, and many times it's completely out of their control. It's the stress of the event, of the incident. And so the social emotional learning also helps very much in our communication. But some of the side effects have been that the students are relating to each other better. And so in classrooms now, learning is communal. Like, we're working together, we're doing group work. And so some of the positive side effects is that we see the kids supporting each other so much more in the classroom around instruction. Even if we're discussing a text, if we're working through a math problem that we're frustrated with, there's so many different ways that social emotional learning can impact what's happening in the classroom. And so we also turned it over to the students after a while, and we have these self-awareness leaders that you'll see in the PowerPoint. Our self-awareness leaders now lead all of the work. And so in grades K to 5, we have our self-awareness meditation leaders, and those students are leading our mood check-ins, our meditation that we do, the mindful practices, their peer mediators. And so that student ownership and voice has been really what caused it to really take off. Because the students will make sure that you make something happen. If you say that you're going to do something, they're going to hold you accountable. So if we're going to check in on those moods and we're going to meditate, my leaders make sure it happens every day, and then I can check in with them because they're also spies, and they'll tell me when it's not happening. So we have seen some student achievement. This past year, we saw a 15% gain in our ELA test scores for people that like to hear about test scores. So we saw a gain in our school-wide proficiency. Some people think this is important. I do too. I really do. I really do. What's important for me is how the kids feel when they come to school. That's most important to me. And if they feel cared for and loved. But this positive side effect is that they're also achieving. So a little bit in the video you saw, we start the day with this mindful practice, and I am at breakfast every morning at 7:30. And so because my staff is so small, it's just me with all the 200, and this year we have 209. 209, and we have a quiet breakfast, and we meditate. We also sing. We recite poetry. It's sort of a town meeting that I have every day, but it's also my way to stay in contact with the children. As a principal, my job is really about adults. And so the kids are no problem. No problem. It's the adults that's the problem. but it's okay. It's okay. That's what the job is about. But to maintain my connection and to make sure that I always remember why I'm doing this work, I like to be there every day. It's really important that those that are leading the work are a part of the work. And it's not something that I ask my teachers to do that I am not doing myself. So we start the day off like this every day. Before we started this, the mornings were chaotic. Kids were coming in with whatever happens at home. They're arguing with each other. And this is how you start the day. And sometimes, however you start your day is how, it's going to go. And the teachers would have to take so much time to calm them down after they picked them up. It was loud. People were arguing. And then I felt like this was impacting. It was like a domino effect of other things that would happen throughout the day. So when we started this, it really did change the atmosphere. So the way that you start in the morning is just really important for us. So these are some of my self-awareness leaders, and we do give them T-shirts. I love T-shirts. It's a great advertisement, but it's also a way that they feel a sense of identity. So they wear these shirts on Fridays. They lead, like I said, the meditations, the mood meter check-ins, the brain breaks. They mediate small conflicts, and they conduct tours, and I meet with them monthly. They have lots of demands that I cannot meet. But you have to have a voice, right? So this is the ruler approach that we learned about from Yale. And there's many social emotional learning programs. This is the one that we chose because we felt like it was flexible enough that we could modify it to our school and we could make it fit. It's not a script. We could modify it. It's not a program that has its own agenda. It really does just fit in with your own school culture. So part of the ruler approach is that all of the students in the class write a charter with the teacher. And this sort of replaces the rules. The charter is, how do we want to feel in this classroom? What are we going to do to feel this way? And what are we going to do when we have a conflict? Because conflicts are normal. They're human. But what are we going to do? And so each class writes their class charter, and that is hung up. Everyone signs it. And the class charter is always a working document because things change in the classroom. Sometimes you may have a problem popping up. Mean girls, gossip. We have to add that to the charter. So there are things, so we revise it. It's never set in stone. We also have a staff charter. Everything that we did with Ruler, we did with only the adults first. That was really important that we did that work with the teachers first before we asked them to bring it to the classroom. So we have a staff charter. And it was more difficult to write the staff charter than it is, to write the classroom charter because adults have a lot of feelings. And so one of the things we got stuck on was safe. Someone said, I want to feel safe. And there was a whole debate around, are you talking about your personal safety? Are you talking about emotional safety? So it took a while, but we do check in on our staff charter. It's hung up in the school, and we check in on Mondays. The mood meter is a meter of how pleasant and how much energy you feel each day throughout the day. So students check in. We check in as adults. You'll see that we have a big mood meter in the school where the staff sort of moves themselves every day so the kids can see where we are. And we can also see where we are. My secretary is often in the red. So we know that when she's over there, don't do it to yourself, okay? So it's like low energy, high energy, and low pleasantness, high pleasantness. The meta moment is like these 6 steps for dealing with a stressful situation. So this is like an in the moment stress. Something happens to you right now that's unexpected. How do you deal in the moment? And the most important step there is, of course, to stop before you react. That's something that we often forget to do. And so the students have their toolbox, their strategies that they use, whether it's taking a deep breath, taking a walk, talking to a friend. So the meta moment is another component. And the last component is the blueprint. And the blueprint is for 2 students who are having an ongoing problem. Like you have students that are like oil and water in the classroom. And so as much as we try to solve, and we know this as adults, there's just people that just rub you the wrong way. It's just, you don't know what it is. And every time you interact with this person, it's hard. So the blueprint is a plan for how you're going to interact with someone that you're having an ongoing issue with. And I often use this blueprint when I'm meeting with parents, because if I'm meeting with parents about an issue that has happened with two children, sometimes when you see this other family and this other child as human, then you start to understand that there are two sides to a story. Sometimes when we're angry with another family or we're angry with someone, all we can think about is that this is the source of my anger. But once they start talking to each other and the parents hear the stories, the struggles, they can see that other child and parent as human. It helps us to be able to resolve conflict. So this is our staff charter that I was talking about, and this is the mood meter, and we use Bitmojis so people don't have to feel like it's pictures of themselves. And so the kids are really excited about trying to figure out who's who, on the Bitmojis. And I asked the teachers and the staff to just give a Bitmoji that shows how you feel most of the time. And so that's what we use, and we move them throughout the day. These are some of the class charters. Our classes are all named after Harlem landmarks or people. And so you'll see each charter is different. One class wants to feel calm. Another class wants to feel prepared. So it really is the personality of that class and the issues that may arise in that class, and how they write that charter is like, what are the most important ways that we want to feel in this classroom, and how are we going to do it? So the mood meter check-in happens throughout the day, and like I was saying, with this program and with the way that we've modified it to fit in the cultural responsiveness, et cetera, is giving the teachers a freedom to do this check-in however they like, as long as they do it. We've created some serenity spaces in the school. So this was a problem of practice, was how do kids experience social emotional learning outside of the classroom, on the playground, at home? And so we wanted to bring the social emotional outside of the classroom. And so we created these calming down corners. We call them calming corners. Some of the teachers also have them inside of their classrooms. So that one at the end is inside of a classroom. These are spaces that are outside in the hallway. The fire department can't stand those spaces, just so you know. Just so you know. So we've done some parent yoga, stress-free nights with our yoga teacher, Mr. Collin. He comes every week, and he does these quick 10-minute bump-ins in different classes. And so we've done those same yoga workshops with the parents and our grandparents. We have a grandparents club. The mindful practices, Pure Edge has a free curriculum online. And so Pure Edge you can find, and they have all of these videos about brain breaks that can happen in the kids' seats, standing up, things that can happen inside of the classroom. We've also been doing restorative circles, which is, something that my district is required to do because the district has a high number of suspensions. And so we were all mandated to do restorative circles. I myself don't have many suspensions, if any, but what we do is we do the circles once a month, and we have a question that we pose to the group, and it's a way for us to have a community conversation. Here's our peer mediators working out some problems. And they do use that blueprint. It's helpful to have a protocol, like a script, when you're trying to solve a problem. And so they're able to solve those problems and bring two students out if there's an issue. It really does help. So again, with the parent involvement, we had the parents write charters for how they want to feel at home. That was part of the Ruler program. And so we do that at our parent engagement nights, where parents sit with their children and write. How do we want to feel at home, and what are we going to do to feel that way, and what are we going to do with conflict arise? And many times parents and grandparents don't have these conversations with their children. So it's really important to provide the opportunity for families to talk about how they want to feel and the things that we might do to each other that are triggers that we can discuss. Here's our grandparents club. And so we really do believe in the wisdom of the elders. So we listen to them. They have no filter. You know that about people, no filter. And so we just listen respectfully and receive. They have a lot to say. We do these parent art workshops. Of course, my background is fine art. I believe that the arts are very important to the nurturing, the holistic development of children. What we're doing in the Common Core and inquiry-based learning has been natural to art teachers forever. And so it's really important that I continue that movement of the arts in the school. And so we do have parent-child workshops for parents and children. We are doing a self-care series this year. The parents did a workshop where they were making skin and hair products. So we've been trying to be creative to get parents in and do things that they're interested in as well. We transformed one of the classrooms and we did a yoga night and hung some lights and got some battery-operated candles. And we really did change the atmosphere. Like, visual beauty is really important. I think it's really part of the atmosphere that you might create at your school. These were our parents that went to Yale to get the training, the ruler training, and then they came back and delivered that to the rest of the parents along with the teachers. I had some parents and students go to present at Yale on the Ruler for Families program, and so it was really exciting for them to go and present to other schools in Connecticut about what we're doing in Harlem. And so the impact has been that we're seeing increases in ELA and math. Our 3rd and 4th grade proficiency in ELA and math beat the citywide average. We've scored above the city district and our own yearly averages in the school survey components of a strong family and community ties. So we always have really high ratings in those areas. And we just support a culture of learning and the quality review. We've been able to show how we integrate all of these practices. And one of the chancellor's big pushes this year is that you should know all of your students very well. And so part of social emotional learning and cultural responsiveness is that you know your children well. And so this fits in directly with that. We have a very low percentage of ORS reports, which are incidents that are reported in the school. We have increased student engagement, student voice, and agency, and improved relationships and collaboration, teacher relationships, and trust. And this is the staff and students. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of Thurgood Marshall. And we always welcome if anyone wants to come and visit. So you can contact me and let me know if you want to come and see it in action. I think that's always the best way to learn about something. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
So we're gonna take some questions now. So we have some microphones, and we are here to. Oh, I see. I'll start right over here. Well, we're recording. So we're gonna... Is this working? Oh, yes.
Hi, everybody. How did you choose your self-awareness leaders, the kids that were the self-awareness leaders?
Yes. So we give a criteria to the teachers, and sometimes it's the student that needs it the most. That's how you get them involved in the work, is that sometimes you will strategically choose someone who actually needs it, and then you can also choose someone that just does it well. So you want to make sure that you have someone that students can sort of relate to. You have someone who can mediate a problem. And sometimes our students that have difficulties are the ones that can actually help others, you know, to solve problems because they're very familiar with what it feels like to need a meta moment. So it's been strategic. Some teachers are, of course, choosing leaders that already show leadership. And in a lot of cases, teachers are choosing students that need it and need a leadership role in it to help impact how they interact with others. You're welcome.
So I'm gonna go here, and then I'll go here.
Usually, we see these programs work very well with younger children. I come from a high school
Yes.
with more than 1,000 students.
Yes.
And in Jamaica, New York, which is a hot place right now, Queens Village. So I would like to learn how do we transfer this information to older students.
So we did recently, we were with the Learning Partners, and we were paired with a high school that we thought it was kind of strange that we didn't know what we could teach them. But there are things that happen in the classroom that are just about practices, not about content. The way that you expect students to communicate with each other, the way that you could check in on how everyone is feeling, the way teachers could do that, the way that you interact with your parents, the way that you mediate conflict, the opportunities that you create for students to share how they feel is really important. And it's not that we're going to solve every problem, but it's the acknowledgement that I care about how you feel. And the moments that we provide to meditate, to take a moment, that can happen with 3,000. It depends on how you create the opportunities. What was really important for us, though, was that we all had to get on board, because we felt like you can't have students have this really positive experience in this room and then go to the next room and lose everything that you just got. So it's really important that everybody is on board. I know when it comes to specific programs like Ruler, sometimes the older children, you do smaller groups, focus groups, interested students, and you bring them in that way and have a staff member that's really going to be committed to that. And then once you start with that student piece, then it kind of grows. But there are things that teachers can do every day just in the classroom. And these check-ins and things that we're doing, 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes that you take away, but it's worth it because it gives you back more instructional time just to check in with everybody and see how everybody's feeling. What can we do to best support you? It's really an atmosphere that you create more than it is about younger and older.
I actually had the same question, but I'm going to come up
Okay.
with a different one.
Okay.
Did you have any struggles with teacher buy-in? And if you did, how did you approach that?
So one of the things was that we had to show them why it works, right? And I think that because we did everything with them first, that was we stretched it out. Like we just did that mood meter, that charter. We did that for months before we brought it to the children. It's really important that the adults recognize and feel why this works, because we certainly didn't learn about this. Some people think it's touchy-feely, but I think that once they see that it works, they want to do more. It was also important for me to have one teacher that I knew did it really well that other teachers could go see, like intervisitations. So that was really important. And then the student piece just made it take off, because whether you agree with it or not, you're not, hopefully, not going to work against students that want to build a positive culture. So it did take some time for a few people. I have one teacher who is Catholic school. I went to the Catholic school. So, I went there for until college. So I know Catholic school. Very rigid, right? Very children should be seen and not heard, like that. But she's so regimented that she makes sure every part of this happens every day. And even if you don't do it yourself, if you just step back and let it happen, the students, they'll lead it. And once teachers see what's happening in their classroom and that they're not breaking up fights, and you don't have kids being disrespectful anymore, and you don't have people throwing chairs, I've worked at schools like that. When you see what it does to your atmosphere, there's no reason why you would work against it. But I do think adults need to see. They need to see why it works.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question is about your breakfast.
Yeah.
I noticed that you said that you have breakfast 7:30 to 8:15, and that's
Yes.
when you do your morning meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So is that built into your school time as well? Like I know our breakfast is 7:40 to 8 o'clock. It's only 20 minutes. So to do that meditation every morning, is that worked into your school schedule?
Well, I actually do. So I'm there at 7:30. We let the kids eat. We have silent reading, so they're reading a book. And about 8:10 is when I start this whole routine because I know the teachers are coming in 10 minutes. So I do it like right before the teachers come. But certainly I feel like it could happen at the very start of the day when everyone is there. And sometimes we go over and the teachers are down there with us and we're meditating. To take the 5 minutes, absolutely worth it for me. Absolutely worth it. And so even if it took school time, I think it would still be worth it.
Hi, I teach middle school in a 6 through 12 school in the South Bronx. And I had a question about the special education population and what kind of modifications that you may have had to do. I mean, I could absolutely see how this would be completely effective with my population. That's I'm a self-contained teacher.
Yes.
But I'd like to know what was the difference,
Yeah.
what different things you needed to do to have it take hold with the special needs kids.
So actually, nothing. There was nothing different. And so part of our school is that our special education students are fully integrated. And so when you come to the school, you wouldn't be able to tell who is who. We don't have any self-contained classes. And so all of our special education students are in a general class and get services, pull in, push out services. But this works so well and works with, I have never seen it not work. And with our special education students, I would say specifically with students who have emotional disturbance, you can actually see the impact so much more because it really does minimize and give them a tool to regulate. And so sometimes that's half the battle, is that people just want to feel cared for and they just want to feel loved. And so when you create that atmosphere, it already minimizes so much, so many of the triggers that they might experience. And so they don't go away, but they have a tool. They can go to one of the calming corners. They could take a walk. They can express, and they know that we're going to listen. And so I have never seen it not work for any child, from the most emotionally disturbed to not. I mean, because the truth is we all have triggers and we all have things that we need to regulate. And so I've seen it work with students with special needs, with the most severe. I have crisis paras, and I've seen it work with all. I've never seen it not work. It just takes longer. And then there's also other things that this child still needs. Like if someone still gets counseling, like this doesn't replace. It really is just a way to be every day, a way to be a part of the community. It doesn't replace if you get special services or you get counseling, or it doesn't replace if the family needs counseling or if someone needs mental health services. But it's just a way to regulate the everyday. And because they know that we're always gonna solve, sometimes that just makes them feel better from the beginning, even though it takes longer to de-escalate. But it works. I've never seen it not work.
Thank you. Hi. First of all, I'm just so impressed with what you have going on at your school, and I'm very inspired. And I like what you said about I'm an art teacher, an artist and an art teacher, and I like what you said about art teachers having done this for most of our careers. I mean, this is what we've been doing. I've been doing this for many, many years, just not naming it necessarily. And being in a very large school with lots of different kinds of styles of teaching and learning going on in other rooms, I struggle sometimes to create, like to roll these kinds of things out and consider my sphere of influence. And I just wanted some advice. I mean, just some practical advice for how can we operate and create an environment in our own room that may not necessarily be synonymous with whatever is going on in math or whatever. That's all. Thank you.
So I think as an art teacher, which I feel like I still am, I use the creative side of my brain all the time in everything that I do. But I know that when you're in a bubble, which I remember being sort of in a bubble and wanting to do something different, I think that if you can create something that happens in your space, that students know that when I come into this space, that this is how I feel, I think that you still have an impact just by creating that atmosphere, even in your own little bubble. So something that I did in the classroom was I always had music. I always had music playing. I always had quiet music. I would sometimes put on a guided meditation. There's so many like guided meditations that you can just play if you don't feel comfortable saying one. And just to take that few minutes at the beginning of the art class, because first of all, you want to tap into that creativity and you want to get that focus going. So it's so natural that it's something that we do to get people to stop and visualize and think, and being able to just do some movement to like focus ourselves or listen to some music while we work. It really is about the atmosphere that I think that you can create for them, at least so that they know when I come in this room, this is how I feel when I get here. And once other people start to see it, they may want to do the same. It's also important for us to share with others what we do. And sometimes we get into a bubble and we're not sharing things at work with our colleagues. But I think you do have an impact to be able, just the fact that you have an audience, you have a captive audience, you can create that atmosphere in your own room. And so what I do now is I play music throughout the hallways. So I took all of the things that I did in my bubble, and I was just able to now share it with others. And because I'm the principal, I'm able to say, this is gonna happen. So that's nice, you know, like we're gonna go to the MoMA. And they're like, oh, we're going to the MoMA again? Yep, everybody's going to the MoMA, right? So I'm able to have a little more control over the things that happen, but I think that you can have that atmosphere in your little bubble. Mm-hmm.
So my question is, I work in a 7 to 12 campus. So my question is, you have your whole school now doing this every morning.
Yeah.
How did you kind of start that process after having the one teacher trained? Did she implement in her own classroom and then you kind of spread it out?
So what happened was when we came back, we said to everybody, we're all gonna try this together. So this was part of, you know, my feeling around, I didn't want anybody to undo the work. So I said, we're gonna learn together and we're gonna try. And what I did was I just gave pieces. So now we're gonna do this charter together, and now let's do it and check in on it for a couple of weeks. And now I want you to go to your classroom and try to do that. And then we added another piece. And then the next year, then I started adding the mindfulness piece. But the breakfast was kind of just something that I wanted to do. I really had to do it by myself. And I had to be the cheerleader by myself to do it when no one else. It took maybe 3 years, to be very honest, before I could see people doing it without me. Like I can go into the school now and hear the music playing without me putting it on. It took years. So in the beginning, I had to be very consistent with it and make sure that it happened the same way every day. And then people started to come along. But sometimes you have to be your own cheerleader, right? But we all did it together. But that piece, I want to say I did that piece by myself. And I'm still by myself most of the time. But if I'm not going to be there, I know that somebody else will pick up and do it exactly the way that I did it. It took years for that. And it took years for everybody to do it really well. And still, teachers are different. Teachers have different levels of effectiveness. So you have teachers that are superstars with this, and then you have teachers that just make sure it happens. So as long as it happens everywhere, that's good for me. Thank you. Thank you.
Will you please have a seat? Dawn's not going anywhere.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was excellent. And so happy you'll be joining us for this next part of the day. So next on our agenda is a panel conversation with representatives from schools, family communities, and museums who will share their thoughts about the field and also the ways in which our communities can support each other. Dawn, who you just heard from, will be representing the school community, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the two other speakers, both of whom I've had the pleasure of working with closely. Our museum representative, Carolyn Keogh, is the manager of school, youth, and teen programs at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. In her role, Carolyn oversees gallery and studio programs for youth audiences, coordinates professional development for teachers, and assists with teaching and curriculum development. Carolyn is passionate about making the museum a welcoming, accessible place for diverse learners of all ages. She has presented at the National Art Education Association Conference with the National STEM Challenge about creating art and technology programs for middle schoolers and families at the museum. Carolyn is a member of the New York City Museum Educators Roundtable and presented on visitor-centered professional development strategies for educators at their yearly conference in 2017. She received her MA in art history with a focus on art museum education from City College and graduated with honors from New York University with a BA degree in art history. Carolyn, please join us next to Dawn, and welcome. Our parent and family community representative is Jackie Delamatre. Jackie has been a museum educator for over 15 years. She currently teaches kids of all ages here at MoMA, yay, the Whitney Museum, and the Guggenheim. She also teaches professional developments and writes curriculum guides for teachers. She taught at the graduate level at Brown University. She has a Master of Fine Art in Writing from NYU and a bachelor's from Brown University. Most importantly, she is a mother of 2 young daughters and co-chairs their public schools' emotional learning community. Please join us, Jackie. So I think these are on, yep, okay. So thank you everyone for being here. So I want to start us off with a question for all of you, and maybe if you want to respond, Jackie, and we can just kind of go around. So my first question is, although the social and emotional learning movement has been around for 2 decades, we've seen a much greater interest in social and emotional learning in the last 5 years. What do you attribute to the increased interest and urgency around social and emotional learning that exists currently?
Well, this brings to mind, I mean, every day I wake up and I read the paper and there's a new story about an increase in anxiety in children, in families. Why that is, I can't exactly speculate. Maybe I think a lot about our political division in our world, income inequality. I also think a lot about that term helicopter parenting, which as I've come to really explore and understand social emotional learning through my own kids and through my teaching, I think of as almost like a red herring of a term. I think what it really describes is this act of anxiously controlling our children, when really, and this has been the epiphany that I've had as a parent, when really what needs to happen is connecting, is empathy, connecting, and collaborative problem solving. Those are my kind of 3 most important touchstones as a parent, as opposed to that feeling of anxiety and controlling that happens that I think helicopter parenting kind of describes. So I think those things have gone into this feeling that we need that social emotional learning. I think it's taken way too long to get to the point where we think about that. And I just kept thinking during Dawn's talk, why aren't all schools doing this? And from the parent perspective, I am so jealous. How can I get my school to do this and advocate as a parent, and thinking about that question about the sphere of influence and how do we extend our sphere of influence to help all of our schools be thinking in this way?
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak from a little bit of a different vantage point. I am not a parent, but what I do notice in my conversations with teachers who come to the museum for professional development opportunities, or even just bringing a class of students for a gallery tour, is I keep hearing these conversations about they're finding that the students just can't interact with one another. There's this lack of connection between students. And so to hear some of the strategies you've employed, I think are phenomenal. And I think that it just is happening more and more. You know, there have been a lot of different ideas as to why that might be. There's some research about the role of technology that has played into that. And I had a anecdotal conversation with a teacher not too long ago. It was a group who have been teaching in a school in Connecticut for over 25 years. And these 3 teachers said about 5 years ago, we introduced iPads to every class. And we have the graduating class, 5th grade this year, the first class with iPads. And it's fundamentally changed what's happening. Not to be a Luddite and blame technology, but I think we're interacting with one another very differently because of our phones and computers and screens and because of some of the learning that's happening in the classroom. So I think this increased prioritization on social emotional learning is maybe to fill some of that void that might be happening between students. I think that's definitely plays a part, and I think that school strategies like the ones that you're using and ways that we can use some of those similar strategies in the museum can help students just connect to one another as humans, which is something I love that you said, where when you see someone as a human, not a tweet, not someone on a screen, not, it changes the way that you interact. Yeah.
So I have noticed over the years that the stress levels of students and parents is much higher than I think I remember in the past. And whether it's socially, economically, I've worked in the same district in Harlem for the 23 years I've been in the same district. And it definitely does feel like people are on edge a lot more than I remember in the past. So I think that it's needed more. The anxiety, again, I agree. Parents are worried about violence in the schools. There's so much that you hear, and people are now worried, and we have to do shelter drills and lockdowns. And so the anxiety levels are really high. The stress levels seem to be high. I've also noticed, like, even though, it seems the same, but it's a little different. Like the level of aggression that I think I notice in students, and people being more quick to react in more aggressive ways. I think that I saw an increase in this over the years. And so this is why this is so important for our children, if we can get them at the early grades and be able to give them the skills that we didn't learn as adults on how to regulate and how to relate to one another, and that it's okay to have struggles, and it's okay if you don't feel happy every day, that is okay, and that we just acknowledge those feelings, and that all feelings are okay. But
what
there's
was
way to
that
work.
amazing poster hanging that I need, be you and the world will adjust?
That's right.
I'm going to get a copy of that from my cube. But just to tag on to that for you, Dawn, on June 20th of this year, Mayor de Blasio and the First Lady McRae and Chancellor Carranza announced a major expansion of social and emotional learning and restorative justice across all city schools. As a school leader who has successfully implemented an SEL program in your school, what was your reaction to that press release when it came out?
So my first reaction is that, welcome, everyone. We've been doing this, right? And teachers, educators, we've been doing this. We haven't been calling it, someone said we've been doing these things, but just haven't been calling it SEL or, so my first feeling was, I'm glad. I'm glad that people finally realize that it's important enough to balance with the high accountability that this is also important, to attend to the person inside. And so I think I was happy about it. What I worry about it is that it's a fad. I worry that it's a catchphrase, that it's something, because honestly, every meeting that I go to has it on there. If not that, then equity, right? I kind of feel like we're hearing so much about it, but what I will honestly say is, like, when I'm in these meetings with principals and we're talking about how to bring this to the school, there's no one that says they don't want it, but how do you do it? This is the piece that I think is missing. There are the announcements about how important it is, but then when people leave these workshops and meetings, they don't know what to go back and actually do. So I think it's that implementation piece is like giving people tools that they can take back. And that's what we do. That's what we do as art teachers. It's like, I come to the MoMA, I come to a workshop, you show me how to do something, and then I go and do it in the classroom. And so I think that that's the piece. It's that implementation piece that I worry about, because everybody agrees that it should happen. There's no one that doesn't want people to be social emotionally aware. But how do you do it when someone has experienced trauma? How do you do it in special needs classrooms? How do you do it? What do I do? So that's what I worry about, is when is that information going to come to people?
Thank you. Jackie, as an educator who's also a parent, who also plays a role in the social and emotional learning in your school community, or tell us more about what the role the parent plays and also in that role, what does the support look like that you're giving? What other supports do you think are needed?
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
So I co-chaired the Social Emotional Learning Committee at our school in Brooklyn, PS 154. And the work that we do is we hold book clubs for parents. So we read parenting books. We talk about them with a group of parents. We invite speakers and we have workshops. We also advocated internally to bring in a curriculum called Responsive Classroom into our school. Our school did not have that before. So those are some of the things we do. I loved hearing all of the parent training you do, because from the perspective of the role of the parent, but also on the museum education side, I know that there's only so much a school can do without the partnership of the parents. And just how much my own parenting has changed from being part of these programs at schools. Like I said, don't want to be a broken record, but moving from controlling with reward charts and consequences to really trying to focus on connecting with my kids, acknowledging their emotions, acknowledging my emotions, trying to collaboratively problem solve around things that come up in our home, and knowing how much I want that from my kids' teachers once I've realized how successful that is, and seeing when it doesn't happen. That's the part that I struggle with, is like, how much can I influence? I can help other parents through these programs, but how much can I do in the school? And those are my limits and my heights.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm curious, after seeing Dawn's presentation, was there anything else that came up for you, just in how she works with the parent audiences and the grandparents?
I love every part of it, but I also just think about so much of it comes from the school leadership, right? That, you're really making those connections between what happens in the school. So there's a seamless, continuous, language and techniques and strategies that kids are using throughout their day and night, and just how important that is, and how I was just thinking about your response to her previous question, how seeing the DOE, like there's a curriculum for math, there's a curriculum for science, there's a curriculum. Why is there not a curriculum that all teachers are being asked to implement for social and emotional? And I think it really comes from where the rubber hits the road with that accountability stuff, right? So it comes from standardized testing right now, but why is there not more accountability around how much schools are implementing, and not in a kind of punitive way, but that we expect all schools to be implementing these curriculum, and we provide the resources to support the schools to do that, right?
Not to put you on the hot seat, Dawn, but in terms of this piece that Jackie brings up about leadership, do you have any sort of advice for those in the room that are communicating to their school leaders, and any thoughts about that, if you're someone who's in the school and then starting within your own class, and then is there anything that you can think of in terms of communicating with leadership that are clearly, in many cases just very overwhelmed with responsibilities and
Well, this is like a good time because the chancellor and everyone has now said that this is important. This is a good time because school leaders have to engage in this work. So I think that it's an expectation. It's part of how the school is evaluated. Your classroom culture, how you know your students well. It's part of a framework that everyone is being held accountable for. So this is the time to be able to share with school leaders. So I have an idea that I want to try in my classroom, and so you try that and then invite them to come see it. I think that's one way to do that. Another way is always, what I've always been inspired by is to go see things in action. And when I'm able to go to a school visit, and this is what we do at schools, we borrow things from each other. We borrow good things. And so I think that going to see it in action always has an impact on a school leader. And then if you want to tie those test scores into it, sometimes that's a motivation for leaders. How do you get, teachers are evaluated in the Danielsons on classroom culture, managing classroom behavior and how you build a culture, right? And so what I had to do for some of my teachers was say, if you want to get a highly effective rating, this is what you do. The highly effective practice is when students are facilitators in the norms. They have helped create the norms for the classroom. So what is that? That's the class charter. We wrote it together. You have participated. So for some people, you have to use the tools of accountability to sort of motivate people. This is how you can get this. This is how you can be well-developed. This is how you can be highly effective. For some people, that's the motivation. And for some people, it may be, do you want to decrease the suspensions at this school? I have an idea of what we can do to decrease. I have an idea on how we can address how parents feel when they come in the school. Parents don't feel welcome. I have an idea for a way that we can do that. So I think it has to be the cheerleaders, the people at the school that know this, that knows, and they can share that.
And can the parents be the cheerleader too?
Absolutely, they can. And some of my most difficult parents, like I have one parent, when every interaction that we had, we were the oil and water, her and I. And every little thing was a big thing, like she would explode. And so I had to make her one of my leaders. She was one of the parents that I sent to Yale. And she started to talk about how it changed her life, how it changed her as a parent. And she tells this story about going into the bodega across the street. And she said, normally I go from 0 to 1,000. And so the man got her sandwich wrong. He must have put cheese on it. She doesn't eat cheese. And so she said to him, and her son was there, she said, I'm in the yellow and I want to stay there. What are you going to do? And I'm sure that he didn't know what she was talking about, but he was so happy that she had not thrown everything on the floor in the store that he said, I'm going to get you a new sandwich. And so that's just like real life stuff, but it impacts people's lives, relationships, you know. So the parents are biggest cheerleaders because they can see how it works all the time.
That's great. So there's been a very big trend in the last few years of research on empathy in museums and how museums can be places that cultivate empathy. Carolyn is someone who's been doing some research in this area. In our department here at MoMA, we're hugely interested in this topic, and it's, has been a conversation for a while. But I'm curious to just hear your perspective, Carolyn, about the role that empathy and the research in it plays in this larger conversation around social emotional learning and empathy in museums.
Yeah, so I think the best way for me to answer that is to speak a little bit about some of the research that I've been doing. So for one of my big projects in my graduate course of study, I had to do a research paper, and I kind of had all these disparate ideas about what I wanted to focus on, and I landed on empathy, because it has been very trendy recently, but also because I felt like it was an umbrella that really touched upon a lot of these different interests that I had in terms of like equity and inclusion, the museum space, and just kind of thinking about what civic role the museum can play in our current climate. And so what I decided to do was to just think about whether empathy plays a role in contemporary art museum education. And so, of course, because I work with a staff of amazing educators, I turn to the educators, Jackie is one of them, to see if if museum educators are even thinking about empathy, because I know it's happening in the classrooms, and I know that empathy has a large role in art classrooms specifically, social studies classrooms, but is it something that museum educators are thinking about? And something that I found through my research is that, yes, they're thinking about it, but not always in some of the research I found, in some of my interviews and surveys that I sent, I realized that educators don't realize how much it's how much of a role empathy plays in our practice. I think when we think of a museum visit, we think about greeting the students empathetically. They come into a museum off of the bus, using empathy in our interpersonal relations. But there's so much about what happens in an art museum specifically that roots our inquiry-based pedagogy in empathy and in empathy building. And so what I discovered, which is not really a new discovery, but it's kind of putting a name to it, is that a lot of times in museums, these conversations we're having about artists, about art making, about the choice making that's happening, is an experiment in empathy, is an experiment in taking the perspective of another person, viewing someone who seems far distant away and sometimes has this gravitas, Picasso or something, like a person. And so for me, that was a really impactful moment of realizing that, you know, what we can do in a museum, in a gallery visit, is encourage the students to think of these grand masters, or whatever you might want to say, as people, and then use those conversations about those people to help them try to facilitate understanding of themselves as people and their classmates. And so that's something that kind of, I think, has come up, and it ties directly to some of these social and emotional learning goals. Yeah.
Jackie, did you want to, as a person who wears many hats
Yes.
here on this panel at many different museums, do you want to, you interested in commenting on the?
I've been thinking a lot about, so my first job in museum education was to conduct a large-scale study at the Guggenheim on the connections between literacy and museum education, and we identified skills that those had in common, and it's made me think about wanting to identify the skills that social emotional learning and museum education have in common, and I've actually been thinking a lot about it. I think number one, the empathy building, right? Developing empathy for artists and fellow students through perspective taking, which came up in your presentation, right? And recognition of multiple interpretations. I think cultivating attention through deep looking, which is something that's very much a part of what museum educators do. I know Larissa's going to be doing that today. I know I'm going to be doing a little of that today. I think reflective and active listening through acknowledging and accepting all ideas and emotions. That's part of our inquiry process. And I think that collaborative problem solving that I love so much in my parenting is through discussion about interpretations, but also art making, I think really comes into that. So anyway, I'm toying around with these skills that I think really do overlap between the two areas.
Absolutely, and later today, as Jackie said, you guys are all going to experience it for yourselves in the galleries, and it's something that Larissa and Francis and I have been spending a lot of time with Jackie, with our other educators. One other thing I just wanted to add about, it kind of goes back to what Dawn was saying about this sense of a little bit more, I don't know if anxiety was the word you used, and you get this sense, and you were talking even specifically in your community. I think some of possibly the interest in museums and these spaces for empathy is I think there is this greater need for us all to find these spaces where we can find a moment, whether it's having empathy for ourselves and just taking a breath and being ourselves and letting the world adjust, or being more open to the people around us. So that's kind of my feeling, is that feeling that you feel, and it's hard to put a name to it, but we all know it and we all feel it, and I think there's a lot of people here today, and I look forward to people sharing about this later, especially during the self-care workshop. There's a lot that we're all kind of contending with. So I think that is kind of feeding that interest. So now I have a question for all of you before we open up for questions from the audience. So my question is, what do you see as the challenges in trying to integrate a social and emotional learning, what do you see as the challenges in trying to integrate social and emotional learning methods and practices into each of these communities? And just to add on to that, what are the challenges, we've talked about that a bit, that you face in your setting, and how can we all collaborate and support each other? So it's sort of a multi-tiered question that we can just kind of volley around.
So some of the challenges that I think that I did experience more before than now was justifying why I spent so much time doing this work with the students, and answering questions about, don't you think you should spend more time on ELA and math? And I do spend that time too, but feel like this is worth it. So before it was something that we were all expected to engage in, I did have to justify. And it was the same thing with the arts, was how do you justify the money that you spend on the arts, or how do you justify the time, all of the partners that you have working with the students in the arts. And until people have buy-in, I mean, I guess like I'm talking about people at the top, until they have the buy-in, I had to justify why I was doing it. And I can do that. I can certainly do it now. But in the beginning, I had to really be an advocate for it, and sort of the cheerleader, even when I was alone, in saying, this is important, and I'm going to invest in this time because I know that it's going to have an outcome. So that it's not the students. It's not even the parents. It's like, it may be higher ups, and it may also be the adults that have to engage in the work and be consistent with it. I have to keep it alive at this point because we've been doing it for 8 years. So now I have to figure out ways to keep it going, to keep it alive. And what we say as principals is like, whatever you inspect, people respect. It's just a saying, right? So if I stop caring about it, then it'll stop happening. So I have to always just be in those classrooms and like shout out people that are doing it well and make a big deal about it and be there for breakfast and be consistent. The consistency is really important. Like, you can't give up even when it gets difficult, even when you're like, this is not working anymore. You have to keep going. You have to stay motivated.
Yeah, something I'm, very practically something that I've been thinking about in terms of the challenge of using these empathy-based practices in a museum setting is, if we're using the artist and the art on view as this center point for personal conversations, emotional conversations, perspective taking, what happens when like all the art on view is by a white male artist? And so I've been thinking a little bit about some of those limitations, the limitations of the museum sphere itself. I think museums can be these places that you walk into and you feel just immediately welcomed, comfortable, happy. But I think for some students, it can be a really alienating place. And if we're trying to have these conversations and make them feel seen as humans, how can we do that when we might not always have robust and diverse works to choose from? I love the MoMA rehang. I think that provides a great, rich opportunity to kind of to face that challenge. But I think that that's something that I've been thinking about in my own line of work. Yeah.
I think that there are so many things that naturally fit with our practice, but I think our challenge now is to think about how we can cultivate some more of those aspects in our practice. And I think probably another challenge is I teach a lot of one-off tours, so kids who get to know me for 1 hour. And so how do I set that tone and be clear and transparent about connections to their emotional states and all of those things without needing so much setup that I can't even get to talking about the art or other things we need to do. So I think time.
And in your parent community, what would you say? What are the?
Well,
you talked a little bit about it, but what?
Yeah. I guess I would capture it with that phrase, sphere of influence. How much can we really change? But I do think at a certain point, with enough parents banging down the door, and I've been getting emails every day from parents in our community saying, I want to join the social emotional learning community too. And once you get enough people on board and you get enough parents, writing to the SLT and talking to the principal with the language that we're trying to cultivate in our group of parents, you start to and we have a new awesome principal who's on board, but he starts to feel, I know he'll start to feel like, oh, I do really need to put this front and center, and I have the support of my parent community to do that. So that's my genuine hope.
And how can we all work together more? And I'm looking at you, Dawn, just, because I can tell you have something to say about collaboration. And if you, please.
Yeah, so
what can we do?
So I think that what I try to do with all of my partners that come into the school is like integrate to them in what we do at our school. Even though it may be momentary, they can see that they can also use some of the tools. So I think that once you tap in to just certain practices where you're either checking in with people or I want the experience that students have to be with everyone that comes in the school. So whatever you're doing at the school, you come on Thursdays, this is what we do. This is how you can engage. So I think that's really important. We've had this long-term relationship, Lisa, right? Even when I was coming to your workshops. And so now it's like, how can we just do this better? How can we just keep this going with our partnership? And when they're looking at great works of art, how can they look deeply? How can we also do that at the school? But then how can they do that? How can we work together and sort of speak the same language?
We're going to switch to your questions, but just one final comment about that, which is that as part of our partnership with T-Miles, we've always had a parent and family workshop, grandparents, parents, other family members, and from the very beginning, it was kind of that idea. So with that, we are going to turn over to your questions. And does anyone have a question they would like to ask? Francis, I think they have it already queued up. It should, I think they control it.
Hello again. So this is a bit off topic, but I'm in my 3rd year of teaching, and I have 2 teenagers, one 15-year-old and one 13-year-old. And once I started teaching, I realized that there's like some overlap with the job of being a parent and being a teacher. And when I became a teacher, it gave me unique insights as a parent, and I realized that when I became a teacher, it gave me unique insights, like in the classroom from being a parent already. So I just wanted to ask, like, 1, if you feel the same way, if you agree with that, and then 2, if you have like examples of how like those relationships, play out in your everyday work of being a parent and being a teacher.
Oh, so much. So first of all, my daughter went through something last year where she had an intense vomit phobia. And the school bus trips created so much anxiety. So I suddenly had a daughter who did not want to go on field trips and dreaded them for weeks before. And I teach field trips. And I realized when I get those 30 kids coming off the bus, and I'm not only am I contending with trying to make MoMA a welcoming space and make them feel comfortable here, they might have just felt like they were about to vomit the entire time they were on the bus, which can often be a long time in New York City traffic. And it just made me see the whole thing from a different perspective. Like, their journey here is like most of their field trip for them, and can be such an emotional trial. And just like the feeling of, the overwhelming sense of the space, and how do we create that kind of centeredness feeling that we're going for in a space where there are hundreds of visitors crowding around an artwork, or, they don't know where they're going. And that just really influenced me. So that's a small example and anecdote, but really made an impact.
So I would say, like, my oldest daughter is 27 and my youngest is 10. So I have to be a different person for each one, but I think that it has definitely impacted, because when I'm sitting across the table, like meeting with a parent whose child has been through something, I can really feel like what that feels like. One thing that I do at the school, and this is probably not a good thing, is that parents have like a direct line to me all the time. So when I first started, like, they all had my phone number, and it was like, Merry Christmas, I want to ask you about something. Like, what uniform do we wear on Monday? So I do get questions like that. So I being accessible to them was something that I did because I wish that I could have that as a parent. I wish that I could call my child's principal and ask them a question. I can't even reach her. So so everything that I do, I feel like I always think in that way. Like, would I want my child to experience what's happening right now? Or is the school, if I feel like something is not safe, would I want my child to be in this position? So I think that I always think as a parent, I think because my kids have all different personalities, I think about my son who's like selectively talks to people and then he doesn't. So I'm like, when I see kids like that now, I can have a different perspective on what's going on behind this. Like, what's happening right now, but what could be happening behind this that I don't know anything about. So I try to think that way, like, is this good enough for my child, what we're providing at the school? And so I think it has always impacted me as a parent and a teacher. I think it's a great experience to be able to have both.
Hi, it's me again. I'm also wanting to get more information about what role the arts curriculum, or just your art in your school, in your particular school, what does it look like, and how is it in service to this greater SEL mission? And I also wanted to point out that in general, I also agree with what you were saying earlier. I think when you are teaching the arts in particular, you have to develop a rapport, and I have often been told that, or asked, how do you get the kids to make this stuff? What is going on? And it's really just not magic. It's just about like creating a space for them, I think, and respecting them and having them feel safe. And all of this stuff is relevant to what we're talking about today. And then they make beautiful things. And it's a very sort of simple cause and effect. And so I was just curious, how does it work in your school? What do the arts look like?
So the funny thing is that I was the art teacher, right? And so when I transitioned into the role, I wasn't able to replace myself. This was a financial thing, right? What I did was I brought in a dance teacher. So I engaged different arts, right? But I have depended on my partners to provide the art. So it happens on different levels, different grades. So everybody is either coming to the MoMA or the MoMA's coming to us. We have a partnership with the Studio Museum in Harlem. They come in, we go there. Part of my work as an art teacher has always been engaging in the work, creating work in the medium of the artist, but then going to see it, like going to stand in front of it and like experience it. So I always try to make sure that kids have that full circle kind of experience. So being able to use the city of New York as your classroom is really important. If we want to have a literacy lesson and have that happen at the Met, like that can happen. Most of the work is it's primary documents for things that have happened that the kids can relate to, storytelling, engaging in the arts, being able to. So we have many arts partnerships is one of the things that I've had to justify. We have Juilliard come into the school. We have student teachers from Juilliard. We work with the Noel Pointer Foundation. It's a violin foundation. We have the MoMA. We have Doing Art Together. We have the Studio Museum in Harlem. The kids have African drumming. We have dance. We have violin. We're going to museums every week, whichever museum, whichever exhibit. We have a partnership with Faith Ringgold. She often comes to the school. She's 87 or 8. Sometimes she lies about, we're on camera. I'm sorry. So sometimes she's around there. She's above 85. I know that. So she has this, she comes to the school because she taught in Harlem. She grew up in Harlem, and she was a teacher. So sometimes she feels like she wants to teach. And so she comes to the school, again, no filter. She comes to the school, and she teaches those art lessons to the kids, and then she invites them to her home. So as much as I can, and I've learned a lot from her about social justice and using the arts in that way too. But just being able to engage with actual works of art has been really important for me. And how I have engaged my classroom teachers who are not art teachers has been important for me because we have Artists of the Month that everyone studies. And so this kind of forces the teachers to learn about artists that they don't know about and to engage in the work, to read about, and to not be afraid of feel like you have to be an art teacher to engage with the arts. So that's some of the influence that I've been able to have, is to make sure that it happens everywhere and not just in an art teacher's classroom, but even outside of that. My teachers have come to the MoMA. We've done PD at the MoMA. And so I just think it's really important that everyone, and there's so much rich history and who we are, there's so much to gain and motivate students in the arts and have that directly transfer into what they're learning academically and tapping into talents and gifts that the students have. And then having them feel some self-esteem around that and then try. So I'm an artist, I've been recognized for that, and now I'm gonna try to do this math problem. you know, even though that's not where my self-esteem lies, but I can feel some motivation. I can feel that I'm recognized for the arts, for being an artist, a dancer. And so I'm going to try in other aspects of my life. So I think that the arts, it happens everywhere, and it's not just one person like it was with me. I would love to have someone that just did that. And so that's been a challenge.
Hi, that's really wonderful to hear about. But of course, we have lots of schools where there's not that kind of passion, and lots of families in New York that don't have a sense of access to the arts that we do have in our city. So I'm wondering for all of you what you think is the responsibility of museums like the Modern, that's having its, whatever, third huge expensive renovation, that has extremely expensive admissions. The Met has new admissions for out-of-towners that are very expensive and prohibitive. The Guggenheim is expensive. I know that a lot of the science museums in the city go out and actively court families by giving kids passes for the kids and the families to come to. I know that as a parent, I know it as a teacher. And I'm wondering what you think is the role of the art museums in this city to do the same.
Can you just raise your hand? I'm sorry, I want to make sure I see you. Hi. Sorry, there's a blinding light. I can start for a moment, then I can maybe pass on to Carolyn. Yeah, thank you for your question. It's very important. You raise a lot of really important issues that we, as an education department, as an institution, have spent a lot of time talking about. And I'll just give you a little bit of information that's sort of very specific to our education programming, which is that, yes, we do have, for our programs, as often as possible, we give passes to any family, any student, or any teacher who comes and participates in programs. So we do have a pass program that gives those audiences admission to the museum and access to the museum. But more importantly, in all the programming we do across the education department, whether it's school programs, adult programs, access programs, team programs, just really across, it's really always thinking about who our audience is and how we really can best serve them, and what are the ways that we can form partnerships with, whether it's the Department of Education or CUNY or parent networks, to bring access. Because it is, all those points you raise, you know, they're very valid points. I mean, not everyone, as you were saying, like, you know, it's coming to Midtown, like, is that even accessible for people? So we're always trying to create programmatic opportunities for those audiences to come and participate in programs. And everybody in our department has different relationships that they work on, that they cultivate. But we always, I think, start from that place of giving as much access as we can. So I'm happy to say in the education department, because it's a priority for all of us, you know, it's a huge priority for Wendy Woon. So, you know, it's something that we're always doing. And yes, some of the things that you noted, like past programs and either reduced, like in our school visit program, we have free school visits for Title I schools, reduced admission for other schools. We have special funding for all high school visits to be free. So whenever we can, we try to offer, you know, that kind of subsidy to our programs as well. Carolyn, do you want to? I don't want to let you respond as well to that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so similarly, we do have we have a pass program for families, and then we also have educator passes to help give educators an opportunity to come, because oftentimes it's, you know, $25 for admission to a museum is outside of a lot of people's budget. I think if I didn't work at a museum, I don't know how often I would be able to foot that cost. So that's something that we provide, and then we also do prioritize giving $1 per student gallery tour visits to New York City public school students. So it's not heavily advertised because it's based on limited funding that we receive, but we do offer that to New York City public school students. Something else that we've started just to kind of pivot away from the school programs is we have a teen program that is open for all teens throughout New York City, but we've really reprioritized getting teens from wide swaths of New York. So having teens that come and work with us through a teen internship where they receive a stipend for their work. So it's paid work and paid employment. They come 3 times a month for helping with our family programs on the weekends, and they receive a nice big stipend that's kind of comparable to an hourly wage. So that's something that we've started as well to increase access and also make it so that teens who, might have wanted to participate in a program like that before we were able to receive these stipends can come, because sometimes, they need to have money, which is something that we've been prioritizing.
Yeah, and there's just one other thing I want to add to that. I mean, obviously these are, great ways that and strategies and programming. It's also sort of the philosophically, I think it's really important to always think about those issues, and I think that's part of it for us too, is thinking about, what are the also personal connections we can make as much as possible. That's why, in the work we do in school and teacher programs, our partnerships are really important, listening to people, and always having this group of people that we can sort of bounce ideas off of, and always remembering that what's most important to us is that you and your students, I'll speak directly from my own, area right now, feel comfortable being here, and never kind of losing sight of those things. And that's what I think is important, that, people are museums should be listening and be reflective, or, responsive, be listening and being responsive when we can. And I can tell you that it is something that we think about a lot, and the institution actually has been thinking about it a lot as well, and kind of taking steps in that direction. But again, just speaking for us in education, it's just part of what we always think about, and what we're always kind of weighing as we develop programs. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So we actually have to hold any remaining questions, which we can still have conversation throughout the day. So the conversation doesn't start, but I want to stop, I should say. I just want to thank our panelists, Jackie, Carolyn, and Dawn, also for her keynote. It's been great having this conversation with you and all of you.